Welcome to Connections and Conversations, an advocacy arena podcast, working to increase civic engagement and strengthen our communities. Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Connections and Conversations. And today I am thrilled to have with me a friend, a mutual on social media, Michelle. And today I wanted to talk to her about something that we kind of discovered just in our conversations, our similar childhood experiences. And I thought it was really appropriate to have a conversation around it because I feel like this is a growing issue in our society and especially in the political climate that we're navigating today. And that is that we both grew up in very religious communities and families. So I want to give you an opportunity just to say hello, and then we'll kind of dig into the meat of the conversation.
Perfect.
So, Michelle, what religious denomination or affiliation did you grow up in?
I was born into a Lutheran family. I would say approximately like the age of 7 or 8. I hate to use the word switched, but the religious connotations in the home became more about Catholicism and Catholic Church.
Right. I know when we were talking yesterday, because this is a subject you and we've done it before. We could just go on and on and on about just to wrap our arms around like some specifics of it. I know one of the things that we discovered in one of our conversations is that you're adopted and how that played into your religious life, family. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I absolutely can. My adopted parents belonged to a church in San Francisco, a Lutheran church, that helped facilitate them in adopting me. When I was younger, I was told, we chose you, you're a gift from God. There was a lot of, a lot of stories around it sounding like it was just this miraculous miracle type event. It was on a Sunday.
The heavens opened up and brought you to them.
Right, exactly. The minister came to us and told us that there was this beautiful baby that, needed a home. And it was a very confusing message because early on it was about, we chose you, right? And then as I got older and conversations, learning that I was adopted and having conversations and curious, kids are curious, right? I hate to say that, I came from a place of like, oh, I don't feel like I belong. But there was an energy around me that I wasn't the same. I would ask questions and, there was just a lot of avoidance of the topic. And so I dug some digging later on and found out that, I wasn't exactly chosen and it wasn't actually God's will, but there was an agency, that Christian agency, adoption agency, that they worked with that helped facilitate the adoption. And so, I had found some paperwork around that, and there were some concerning things for sure that I found that didn't sit well with me.
Right. It was just kind of contradictory to the stories that you had growing up.
Very much so.
Like I said, without getting too personal and sharing too much of it. But one of the things, as you said, you did a little digging, later on. And then this, early message of being chosen, a gift from God. And then also the contradictory side of that when sometimes maybe they weren't happy with you or whatever, like.
Yeah, I mean, there were very manipulative words that were used early on about I wasn't allowed to have feelings. So if I had an outburst or, wasn't happy or was crying, it was, you need to stop crying. There's no crying in the household. There's no, if you don't like it here, we can take you back to the church and find another family that you would be okay with, that you would be happy with. So it was very manipulative emotionally and mentally. Yeah.
That's unfortunate, but you've worked through a lot of those things. And I know, like myself, you and I both within those families, adopted or biological, we have not only these communities that are very religious, we're going to church all the time, regardless of the denomination or whatever, because my experience was Pentecostal. That was like my maternal grandparents' church that they had helped to form. And we talked about just some of the experiences in there, and not realizing like what is very normal for you or for me, that for other people, even within religious circles, it's very weird and different. Like, as you know, I kind of told you, like growing up in a Pentecostal church, it's all of these kind of evangelical behaviors and doctrines, and one of them is like speaking in tongues. And when you get baptized, I told you that experience of having to tarry,
Yes.
so to speak, for the Holy Ghost. And basically, what that meant was praying, like just over and over again until you start speaking in tongues. And you told me about an experience like you remember, like this was when you were when your family was leaning you more toward Catholicism, and like there were some rituals around that, when things happen, like the Lord's will is used a lot for a lot of things.
Yes, I heard it every day, right? God's will, God's way, and anytime that there were concerns or problems, in the family with friends, health issues, if somebody was sick or dying, it was a shock to the system because I do remember in the Lutheran church, it was very much like, okay, you go to church and the minister would talk about a community member and we would pray. So moving into the Catholic realm of things, I have very specific memories of my aunt and uncle, sharing stories about a family member who was sick. One particular family member had cancer, and me and my cousins, I had four cousins, so there would be five of us girls literally crawling on our hands and knees around the property, whether it was like around the garden or around the home, and you crawled and you prayed. And that had a very profound effect on my life because, if not all of those circumstances, those moments, it didn't change anything. The person still unfortunately passed. I just didn't see the results. We would do this, and I remember coming into the house and our knees would be just torn up. Our hands would have, gravel marks, and those memories are very, very real and very something that has never left me. And so I do struggle, like today when people say, "Oh, praying for you." Like, okay.
Exactly. Certain words are very triggering when you've
Yes.
grown up in a religious community. I know that for me, like you said, that fasting and praying. So, like, I get triggered.
Yes, fasting too. Yes.
Yes.
Mhm.
I get triggered by the thoughts and prayers, that kind of thing, because it kind of brings that part up. But I know you and I both talked about how later in our lives we found our own ways. Like, I called myself someone who is spiritual. Like, I grew up in the Christian faith, but I'm spiritual. I don't lean into any particular denomination because I saw so many things. And it seems that we both had like family members who were faith leaders, who were, either ministers or other prominent positions within the church. So tell me a little bit about how, even like you said, even though the religious community writ large you're in, but how it may differ a little bit when one of your family members is a leader within that community.
It was very complicated. So my grandfather on my mother's side was a Lutheran minister. I had an uncle on my father's side, the oldest brother of his was a Catholic priest. So, I mean, I hate to make it sound so light and add so much humor to it, but I don't ever remember being able to eat a warm meal, right? Like you pray at dinner, and if you were lucky, you got to eat within 20 or 30 minutes, right? So, like, I don't ever
Because
remember.
all the praying before.
Yeah, it was exactly like you prayed before every meal. And it was so ingrained in me that religion was family. Religion was part of my social construct. It was part of every decision that I was ever to make in my life. I had a dad who was very old school in that in his mind, I should not have gone to college. I should have become a teacher or a secretary or,
The
um,
patriarchy.
yeah, exactly. And that, my only way to happiness in his mind, which was God's way. And that meant being married to a man, having children, and living that as my truth. And my mother basically just early on, that was very true for her. But then, they divorced. I started to see these strange rifts, right? Where I realized, what do you mean you can't get remarried in the church, right? What do you mean? And so it was like watching my dad literally marry a total of 4 times. My mother married 2 more times after that. And so there was a lot of pressure, right, about being married. And it didn't matter. And I think one of the things that I took away from it too, that was really concerning to me, was that women in my life were looked down upon, right? So if they didn't do the things that the church told them to do, sadly, if they couldn't conceive children, they were treated as if they weren't worthy, right? If they divorced, they weren't allowed to stay in the church, they were shunned. And yet I watched my father be embraced by the church. So it was really confusing. And then I remember watching my mother jump from all these different churches. She felt lost, right? So she was looking for another church. We went through, I think I shared with you, we went to other Lutheran churches. We went to United Methodist churches. We went to Catholic churches. We went to, oh my goodness, I even remember going to a Mormon church with her at one point. She was just searching. And I remember feeling a lot of empathy for her in that period of time in her life because she didn't feel like she belonged to her community any longer. Nor did I, right? Because I was a part of that by the extension of that. So yeah.
Right. And that's kind of part of it because I think that we recognize that there is a sense of belonging and community within that group, that church or denomination or whatever. But when you cross the lines or whatever, then you are shunned and ousted within it. And each one of them can have some really strange kind of requirements. And of course, we both kind of left and found our own way. And I love the way that you described it. And I want you to talk a little bit about that, like kind of deconstructing your religious childhood. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's hard to summarize 20 years, right? But I'll try.
Yeah.
It started for me because I became a single parent and I had both of my parents saying, you need to be married. What are you doing? And some stories that were told. I don't think I shared this with you. So I actually had my parents telling other family members that I had married somebody in the Coast Guard. And he was stationed in some country. And so, like, they were trying to explain away why I was alone and pregnant. And so I would get calls from some family members saying, "Oh, we're here if you need." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? What do you mean if I need? I don't know. Why are you calling me?" Yeah. So it was all very strange, and that's kind of what started when my eyes really opened up, and I was like, the fact that my family feels like they have to create these stories to protect their own like reputation within the churches, and because it really didn't have anything to do with protecting their reputation from like neighbors, or nobody knew me, right, wherever they lived at that point in time. So I started to break it down and I was like, what does this mean? What is, why do they feel like this is so awful, right? I had a great job. I completely was able to care for myself, so it wasn't like I needed somebody to care for me. So it just didn't make sense. So I started to break it down and I started to realize their beliefs were not my beliefs because I grew up with that, literally with that ingrained, like, religion is like what the church says is what you need, how you need to live your life. And if you don't, and also being adopted for me, it created this sense of like abandonment. So, like, if I didn't, what does that mean, right? I'll be abandoned. And that was like my worst fear. That was like legitimately my worst fear ever. So it was like, I have to do all the things. I started to break it down. I started going to therapy. And the first 5 years, I can't really say that I was deconstructing my religion because I didn't even know what that meant back then. It was just I knew that I had trauma around the church and things that had happened and how things were handled. And then, having issues with my parents and actually reaching out and trying to speak to one of the ministers and realizing there wasn't a whole lot of help. It was like, read your Bible and pray on it. That was always the solution to everything. And I remember thinking at that time, like, this is not, what do you mean? Like, that doesn't solve anything. I need a plan. And that's always been I think, how I've gotten through life is this sense that I need a plan. And so I need information. I need a plan. I need those things to survive. And so that's been what kind of pulled me into this whole, like, I'm what I need to survive. I don't need the church. I need to have a sense and belief in something possibly bigger than myself, whether that's, whatever you want to call it, God, source. That belief is important to me, but all of the rules, and I love the ritual of it all. Yeah, but just this, and there was always a lot of pressure too on tithing and like, um, it just wasn't sustainable for a single mom, right? Like, what do you mean I have to give you, 20% of my income? Like,
Lifestyle
I
demands.
can't afford you.
Yeah. Mhm.
And that's kind of where it started. And so started breaking it down and realizing that, I hate to say this, but as I stepped away from the churches, I started to feel like a functioning human being, like I could get things done. I could take care of the things I needed to take care of and stand in my own truth and belief systems. One of the things that really shook me was when I got pregnant with my oldest, because here I was raised with this whole pro life mentality. And when my mother found out that I wasn't, that I was pregnant and had no plans to marry, and that was my choice. The gentleman asked me, I was like, no, I don't want to. And so her response to me was, you're going to get an abortion, right? Yeah. So it was, oh, it gives me chills just saying it out loud. It it was a lot, right? It was just like, what is happening to
Right.
my bubble, my world, right? Of all of the things that I was told, all of the things I was raised to believe, felt so like it was just one big lie, honestly. And so you know, that right there kind of created a discourse, and my mother and I kind of became estranged for a while. And then she would say something or do something, and that was just not acceptable. And I would get cards in the mail from her with
Hmm.
literal passages cut out of a Bible, and it would say, Jesus would forgive you, forgive me, you know, please forgive me. So it was always used as a way of manipulating and like guilt, the guilt, and it just never ended. Seeing the struggles within my community too, and the hypocrisy that went on where people would do things that
Abuse.
were inappropriate,
Hmm.
cheating, harming others. And then, they would, especially in the Catholic Church, they would go in on Sundays and confess their sins, and it would just start all over again.
Clean slate.
Yeah, that wasn't how I wanted to live my life. Like, one thing I've raised my children, I let them choose, right? I was like, if you want to get into religion later on, that's your choice. I support it. But my biggest life lesson with my kids growing up is just don't be a jerk. Be kind. Take care of your community. The things that I took from, there were things obviously that I didn't care about or didn't like within the church, but there were things that I did love and embraced. And that was, community, taking care of your neighbors. I had my aunt specifically really left an impression on me. She actually used to work for the state hospital, the mental hospital here in our county. And she did it. She did the work every day. And she would come home and she would cook more and take food to friends and family who needed, and there were always events at the church that she would participate in, and us kids would get dragged along. And that was my community. That's where I felt safe as far as the church was, like there was a sense of family within that specific church. I felt like I belonged there. as I got older, I kind of moved away from that. Obviously, I started living my own life, but that always stuck with me. And, I see the politics today, and I'm just, to sum it up, it just makes me sick to my stomach of the behavior I'm seeing right now, the laws being passed. It's about controlling people
And they're using religion to do it.
and using family, right? Religion within a family and within a community to harm people. I'm struggling right now with everything that's going on. Yeah.
And I know my heart goes out to you, and because I know that you live like in an area, we've talked about this. ICE raids and these things are very real for you in your community and within your family. I guess as someone who does, have a faith system or whatever, what do you say, or how do you plan to continue knowing that in many ways this ethos that is stirring in our climate now is very much a cult, but it's built off of other cults maybe that we were raised in ourselves, and how people are being kind of swept up into that, like it's not going anywhere. And we do want to live in a country that people can have a good quality of life and care about their neighbors and these kinds of things. I know you're still struggling, but what are some of the things that you do?
One of the things that I did early on, like I would say I was probably in my 30s, is I really made an effort to learn about different religions and trying to understand other communities and what that means for them, from Christian communities to a Muslim community to Jewish communities. Like I tried to open my eyes to all of it. Buddhism, I did as much
I
learning.
tried out the Baha'i faith and that community.
Yeah, so I was just open to all of it. I wanted to learn more. And for me, being open to learning more about the world around us and like having grace and giving people space to just make their own choices and whatever that is and what they believe in, I think is what gets me through. And right now, I feel like it's really important for us to just using the knowledge we have and to not necessarily elevate any kind of like dark message around the church. That's not my goal here. I like around adoption, I feel like that was talked about a lot, right? A couple of years ago when Roe versus Wade got overturned. And, my whole point in messaging, because I do believe in sharing information with people and saying, hey, you know what, this is not, as somebody who was adopted, this is not the answer. It is not the solution to pregnancy. It's just not. And what if, trying to share this with people who are pro life is that, what if we actually then, if you're so against it, then why don't we create support systems where women can financially afford to have children? Because a lot of women choose to not have children because I'm not saying it's the main, but to a lot of women I know and have spoken to, it's a huge factor in why they make the decisions that they do, whether or not to raise a family is, can they afford it? Can they provide for their children? And so, that was a conversation that I tried to have with a lot of people. So I think for me, it's important to share information. It's important to when people need it to be there and give them access to the information. It doesn't behoove us to assume that people have the same access to the same information, right? And that's one of the things I love about UD is that you open up a world of just giving access to so many different resources and people, and it's truly beautiful. I mean, I've talking about the ice raids and stuff, there was a situation that happened near us, and you had said something in one of your pods about networking and creating an environment in your own community, and it really it was like a light switch went off. And so I reached out to neighbors and I reached out to the local community, and I went to some of the business owners here and said, hey, how about we create like a phone tree type of situation so that we can all be on alert. And then not that we're trying to block anything or create any kind of discourse, but to actually create a safer environment for all of us. So that's important.
It really
Yeah.
is. And that's advocacy.
Right.
So I want to thank you
Thank
for
you.
sharing your experience. I'm glad that our community, which you are also a part of, is inspiring for you in your real life. And I believe in the power of that ripple effect. So we're going to keep having these conversations and doing the work in our community and sharing our faith and our belief, whatever that is, and exposing those areas of the cracks in these belief systems that are being used in a harmful way and try to peel that back. But we both know that's going to be a lot of work and a long,
That's a
yeah, a
really
long
big,
term,
big onion. Yeah, yeah, that's a lot of peeling.
yeah,
Yeah,
long-term job. But thank you for doing what you can where you are and using your voice to help others.
thank you so much for having me on, Dee. I really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Connections and Conversations. This is one of many wonderful interviews that we bring to you to help connect you to a larger community of advocates and change makers across the country. You'll get a glimpse into the various ways people are making an impact in their communities. My hope is that it will inspire you to get engaged in some small way as well. We can't all do everything, but at this moment in history, we can all do something. What are you doing? One of the things you can do is to continue to listen, subscribe, and share this Advocacy Arena podcast. You can also join and support the growing grassroots Advocacy Arena community in other ways. Join our weekly live chats hosted on Spoutable every Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern. Subscribe to our Substack to get great articles on important topics and exclusive access to extended interview conversations. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. We've got some exciting programming lined up. And keep listening to our regular podcast episodes wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, subscribe and give us that all-important 5-star review.